We've created victim culture, right? I'm offended by everything. Or the famous phrase that is so untrue, but people say all the time, you make me feel. Not true. We choose how we feel. We choose the emotion, whether we're constantly aware of it or not. And so we've created these little unassuming things that reflect victim culture, but we have to be able to honor the experience.
Nothing you do matters unless what you do matters. I'm Amadon DellErba, and this is Get Real or Die Trying. How are we doing, tribe? Amadon DellErba here from Get Real or Die Trying. We are in beautiful Sedona, Arizona in the dojo here, and I'm very excited to be sitting down with Kevin Walton. Flew out from Florida. He's an activist, he's a transformational specialist, he's a filmmaker, an actor, and he's a father, and he does a lot of great work. I met him up in Canada at a men's retreat on an island, and we hit it off, and I'm stoked to be sitting down with you, brother. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, it's an honor, brother. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, Get Real or Die Trying. You know, my podcast is, I call it the pursuit to self-mastery, you know, sitting down and just talking to people about life. Like, what does it mean to be real? What does it mean to have this human experience, you know? I feel like we're spiritual beings, you know, having a human experience. And, you know, as we grow and ascend in this world and figure out what it means to be in this vessel of flesh, how can we tap into realness, you know? And so sometimes I just like to just start off with, like, what do you think it means to be real?
I love it. To me, to be real is to be the core essence of our authentic embodiment. So when I think of the idea of something being real, it means it's more tuned into the universal functionality of truth. And the idea of our own realness, one of the things I'd like to tune into as a statement I say all the time is the most realistic thing about life is anything is possible. So that means it helps keep me intact with things can go awry as much as they can fall apart. So it's not like blind optimism. It's not blind pessimism. It's the recognition that all things are on the table. And so for me to be real as a person, to show up in me, it would be to recognize the truth of existence and whether I am showing up in proper accordance to that or not. So it's not just how tough I am or how creative I am or if I'm right, but to be real is, am I really honestly and authentically embodying the nature of who I am designed to be, you know, in every facet, from the multidimensional into physical existence. Because part of what I teach is how to shift our reference point to understanding ourselves as spirit and multidimensional first, and then living into the human experience. Yeah. And in that way, it's more tapped into a greater comprehensiveness of us as well. Yeah. And rooted, like for it to be real, there's got to be that grounded sense of being. So it's not too like aloof or esoteric or abstract, but the grounded structure of it as well. And to me, those things represent more of what supports the realness of ourselves.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Great explanation. So as a transformational specialist, tell our listeners a little bit about what that means to you. How you work with people and facilitate people's personal transformation.
Yeah, it's, to me, that kind of phrasing of it is the dedication to seeing people change and evolve in a progressive way in themselves. And that is comprehensive. So in my practice of Creatorhood, I call it the art of living from truth. So a way of recognizing all these facets of us, the body, mind, spirit nexus, the emotional intelligence, how we create our reality, all these different facets and key systems at work in our existence. So the work I do with people, whether it's an individual or couples or family or a business or a team or any of that, it's dedicated to understanding how the structure of existence works and their systems at work, and are they functioning in an aligned way and a misaligned way? Are there pain points and emotions unprocessed that have to be freed up and redirected? Do they have a clear line of sight of where they're directing the creative power they are? Are they aware of the power they are and own it properly? So it's a way of approaching life to support them living more authentically embodied from the inside out. And when we're doing work, if it's, say, people coming to either take my courses or programs or events, there's foundational mechanics that help establish the framework of a reference point. But if I'm working with a client or a company, and whether it's in consulting or coaching or in any form of session of development, we start from where they are. And through that, understand what's happening internally, what's happening externally, what's the correlation, and then the process of being able to get energy to move, energy to integrate, and energy to be redirected. And all of that helps support what I call the consistent progression of transformation, which is transfiguration. So that's where all change is happening for advancement.
Yeah.
And so the dedication of really supporting people living more masterfully in themselves in every way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's gone on in your life that led you to this process? You know, I'm sure you had your own transformation, your own discoveries, your own changes in your life. And, you know, was there a specific time or moment, or was it an evolution, or what was kind of the aha and the process of your learning experience to learn these tools, you know, to pass on to others?
Yeah, it was a steady progression of a series of things and a constant curiosity of something I had access to. So when I was younger, I would have these really interesting experiences, things I didn't know what to make of, right? Like hearing voices, seeing visions, tapping into the inner workings of things. But in the 80s, where I was, no one was talking about this stuff. I didn't have any lens, so I didn't have a soundboard. So I didn't pay it much mind. I just knew these were interesting experiences, but I was like, well, I guess this is what everyone's having, so it's just a thing. And I just kind of went on about my life, but I was always naturally intrigued into the mystery of life. So whether that's the cosmos and space and UFOs and Bigfoot and Loch Ness, like I just, as a kid, I loved the curiosities of life and certain history things. And as I got older into my late teens, it started to dial in a little bit more. And then I had a close friend of mine who we would have conversations about Egypt and different civilizations. And I was like, oh, there's other people that like to explore this stuff like I do. And then as I got older into the late teens and getting ready to go to college, and my mom, she had kind of seen things I was tapping into and exploring, and she kind of recommended some books to read to see if there was something there for what was happening with me. And she had me read Conversations with God, and I appreciated those books and, you know, the different things I've offered, but it still wasn't fully touching on the things I was experiencing. And then she put me on to Seth Speaks, and that was the first time I had come across anything that was speaking to exactly what I was experiencing and to the degree and depth I was experiencing it, like verbatim. And that became a huge catalyst, because that was when I remember reading going, I'm not crazy, right? I'm not crazy. And that became a catalyst. Okay, so whatever I'm accessing is real, and I want to now really open up to more of it. And that kind of created what I call the waterfall effect, where the moment that decision was made, it was like a flood, this vast canyon of access. And it was so much that as I started to explore it, I felt like I was having these quantum leaps of growth, where it was like 50 years and centuries in like a month. It was wild times. But even prior to that, when I started tapping more of this stuff during college, it was really alive in me, but it was a really internal struggle between the idea of who I thought I was and all this information that kept knocking everything on its ass. And I had this really, you know, I was really revolutionary minded and in misaligned ways early on, and thankfully matured with it. And so then I would have a series of experiences, near-death experiences, different like journey moments that were instantaneous. It wasn't through any plant medicine. It was just natural access moments. And then through that, I started, when I finally did explore plant medicines, I knew what the experiences were because I was tapping into them early on. So I had a lot of just these moments that revealed so much to me that I had to start to make sense of. And as I started to explore it and experiment with it, things started changing. I started to understand it more. And that's what led to people asking questions, and that led to me sharing, and that slowly led to, you know, so it was this natural, organic evolution of the journey, and being able to like explore and read and see where these things are out in the world to make sense of what I was tapping into. And when I finally decided to start offering it to groups and created what I call the Gathering of Light Beings, it really opened up a container of how many people were really looking for, you know, this wisdom, and being in a space where they could explore, where nothing's off the table and there's no judgment, but really getting people to dial in more of the truth of life. And then through that, people were asking, you know, well, how are you doing these things you're doing and tapping into this stuff? And I had to start exploring, like, what are the mechanics of what I'm doing? And that led to me structuring it, and eventually led to the practice that the first title I gave it was Anamnestic Awareness Expansion, which didn't have the same quite ring to it, but it was, now it's Creatorhood, simple. But the reason I called it that was, it was a recognition of us remembering that which we have always known. and then living into a more expansive state through that. And so I just kind of summed it up in that statement. But when I started to really craft it, I was thinking of what would be a word that really holds this. And when it finally dawned on me, because it's all throughout the practice, it was like, this is Creator. This is a dedication, operating system, and a spiritual practice and life path toward us living into the way we've always been designed to be, and how to identify when we're in alignment with that and when we're not, and how to make adjustments when we're not, and how to compound when we are.
Yeah.
And so the journey was a genuine organic one. There's so many different things, because I've been an athlete in my life, musician and rapper and actor and writer, and all of these things had a place of my own personal revelations and spiritual awakenings. But the centralized spiritual awakening I was having personally through these accesses were very profound, and took time for me to journey and experiment enough to really start to make sense of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think of belief, it's such a powerful thing. Mm-hmm. And I personally feel that everybody on this world believes something, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
And so they may not prescribe to a organized belief, a religion. I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a Buddhist, I'm whatever, I'm an atheist, I'm agnostic. They may not prescribe to something structured, but they still have a belief in them of they conduct their life based upon what they believe and the choices they make. And so I've always thought it was interesting that people who claimed, even let's just use spirituality and religion, because that's the easiest and understandable kind of low-hanging fruit. An atheist says, I have no belief. Well, you do. You have a belief that there is no belief.
100%. Yeah.
You have a belief there's no God, and you conduct your life within that belief system.
100%.
And it's not a normal thing for human beings, especially it seems like in Western culture, to discover their own personal beliefs, and to, what are my beliefs? How do I live my life? What is truth? Because truths are contained within someone's belief system, and what's true to someone may not be true to somebody else, and it gets weird, and we get divided, and we argue about it, and the highest concept I feel that unites humanity is unity without uniformity, and the Urantia book, a book that I read, and I think you have dabbled in that too. The Urantia book talks about unity without uniformity, and how do we find the unity? And you mentioned creatorhood, and creatorship, and I always feel like personally for me, it's like we all have something in common.
Correct.
That we can find commonality, and also we're all created beings. So whether someone believes they're created or not, they're still a created being.
It's automatic. Yeah,
they're automatically a created being. I'm a created being. So we have this, creatorhood, as well as just this being aware that there's a creator. Yeah. And even if this person doesn't believe that there's a creator and that they just, popped into existence somehow, and that's fine. But because I believe they are created, the way I treat them and conduct myself with them is honoring that recognition. And so I don't see a separation, whether because they don't believe what I believe. I see someone who's still a created being, and
correct.
What do we have in common? And separation is so common, and the media is always trying to polarize and separate us and create these divisions. And I think anyone who works in transformation, whether they are articulate in their mind of discovering this process, to me, transformation is about finding the commonality, and working, and then individualizing the uniqueness of somebody to find their self, their personality. And God has created personality. We all have a unique personality, but we do have to earn it. We have to ascend towards it. We have to discover it. We have to find it. We're not just born like, all right, here's all your talents and abilities, and here's who you are. And that discovery process is the transformation. And in your work, is there a belief that you used to have, a very strong belief that you no longer have?
Yeah, well, in the way I break it down in the practice is it's the difference between unity consciousness and duality consciousness. Mm-hmm. So duality consciousness is a belief. It's not real. It's just a belief. Unity consciousness is how creation functions. Mm-hmm. And the journey of our lives, and as it was for me personally, the difference between beliefs and truth is the truth doesn't change. And there is universal truth. And there's the concept of your truth, my truth isn't a real thing. The universal truth is the thing that holds everything and lives inside of everyone. Because that, and the way I break it down in the practice is I define truth as the most accurate alignment of unified completion. And what that means is that there's a way to exist to such a degree of capacity that you meet the greatest actualized state. But it can only go so far in physical reality, because when you go into absolute truth, you're way beyond physical reality. So there's a journey that we're on in it. And so unity consciousness isn't like everything being uniform. It's what makes unity is it's all diverse elements working together as one, not all being the same. And so that's how creation functions, right? All the different distinctions. And duality, the way I break it down in the practice, is that duality is a belief in separation, a belief that separation is opposed to itself, and that there's not enough, which none of that is actually true in creation, but we can believe it enough to play out the narrative.
Yeah.
But unity consciousness is a recognition that everything is a part of the source of all creation. And source is the word I use for God, because it's, to me, in my personal experience and relationship, it's the word that held the true relationship of myself to my creator, and the thing that created everything, that is so far beyond the concept of a human existence. So it doesn't, but yet it endows all of creation with all its personality, all the things, right? And so in the spirit of that, then the journey is living into the recognition that we are all a part of the all of creation, yet in different distinction. And distinction is what allows us to play the interaction and the relational dynamics of life. So you and I, right, all of us, we're all a part of creation itself, but each of us are a unique expression within it that is simultaneously receiving from it and contributing to it by the dance of the relational dynamic of life.
Yeah.
And so things that represent truth, and how I break down the practice, is the truth lives where all is all universal, all inclusive, meaning there's no separation to it. So if it's, and it's consistent, doesn't change. So if it's true today, it's true tomorrow, it was true yesterday. If it's true for you, it's true for me. There are things that are universal like that. And then there's experiences you're having, experiences I'm having. And the truth lives in what's driving all that underneath. And so I break that down in the practice to understand the inner workings of creation itself, which is why I call it the art of living from truth. So essentially it's the science of how creation works, and then the art of how we're wielding it.
Yeah.
And then that's true to regardless of what anyone believes, because it's what's driving things. So like you stated, if someone doesn't believe in, say, a creator, all things still stem from something.
Yeah.
Right. Regardless of what the name is, regardless of what people, however they want to describe it. And so what I do my best to break down in Creatorhood is the recognition of that in a way that can touch on any form of experience. And by recognizing the systems that work and the patterns, it helps it be consistent. So part of what I was really dedicated in building Creatorhood was to ensure that it's built in a way to help clean up any contradiction. And that was a huge thing for me in my journey and evolution, because I had all ideas about life, and I didn't recognize at the time that now I have language for, of the difference between duality and unity consciousness. So when I was in duality, believing in separation and that I was somehow disconnected from something, and or that I'm not enough, or believing certain things made me less of value in whatever, when you come to recognize truth, that the nature of these experiences are always that invitation. And like you're describing the nature of transformation, the journey of creation, all energy flows to truth. So if we're coming into the game of limitation, that's physical reality, we come in with a certain lack of awareness to explore living into the truth of ourselves, into that maturation of what the full will of divine order is and can be. Mm-hmm. And so it's a really powerful thing to come to that. And so when I think of some of my previous beliefs about life, or what I thought I knew, and then accessing all these insights and how much it was rivaling everything and cleaning up every contradiction, it really changed everything. Yeah. And when I used to think about the idea of there being enemies and I'm in some battle, and then coming to know the truth that there was no battle. And I remember when I really started to understand that, I grabbed a pen and just started writing. And one of the statements that came out of me was, I didn't realize there wasn't a war until I stopped swinging, or there wasn't a fight until I stopped swinging. And then suddenly everything changed. My going back to beliefs, right? Because we create reality through beliefs, right? Through charging ideas into some kind of form. And when I started to redirect my beliefs and establish different ones, everything changed. Where I used to get into it with cops and be racially profiled and get into fights with them, all that, my experience with that changed. When I used to think about how I experience life and myself, or if I lived in narratives about, man, you can't trust anyone and anything worth having doesn't come easy, and blah, all these different things that would perpetuate more unnecessary hardship in my life. That when I started to realize things can be as difficult or easy as I make it, things, there's always opportunities to grow and live into more of myself. Any choice I make, even when I'm out of integrity, doesn't diminish me in the eyes of divinity, but it brings to light where I have to clean up the way I'm functioning. Like all of those things will always stay consistent. And that's when you know you're tapping into truth.
Yeah.
That way, no matter what, as you grow, it will stay the same. The things that change as we grow are the things that weren't truth, but they were an honest moment we were having for the time being, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a huge distinction for me in what really expanded in my awareness in this practice.
Yeah, you talk about duality consciousness and unity consciousness. And one thing I think about personally, there's duality in every human being as far as lower nature and higher self, higher self, the false self, and the real self, and the battle that we can have if we choose to battle, or we, however we approach it. Like you said, it's a choice. But I think we all can have, some, indigenous people call it there's two wolves in us, the dark wolf and the light wolf, which one you're going to feed. And we have duality, but should be striving for singularity or unity, that's where we merge, like that human nature and our lower selves, becomes less and less dominant to our spiritual nature and our higher selves, and we come into singularity, and purpose. And that's a daily walk, it's not like you have this enlightenment aha moment where then you're like this ascended being, because we're still mortals on a planet, in flesh and blood.
And that's the exploration. Yeah.
And we're, at the stoplight and someone rolls down the window and, flicks us off or something. And then we decide, do we go to the lower nature and, or do we turn good for evil? And, what that person did has no effect on me because I know who I am and what I'm doing and whatever, it doesn't affect me. Or if I'm not in my higher self, it affects me. I get enraged. I want to then, throw the bird back, or something. And this battle that we go through as human beings,
Yeah. So the way I break that down is we're never separate in ourselves. It's all a relationship.
Yeah.
So the idea of a more embodied version of us that's healthy and more higher evolved in frequency, and the version that's lower, they're polarities of the exploration of oneness. That we're not striving for a singularity as much as we already live in the singularity, and the journey of our lives is the realization and the actualization of it through our lived experience.
Yeah.
So that we're more intact. And it's not that we're battling between the two wolves. It's the wolves are designed to work together, and the more we can own ourselves completely, we understand the dance of life. It's like the relationship of chaos and order, right? Where chaos is undirected creative potential, order is the structural utility of it.
Yeah.
So our journey of life is lived like that, but when we think it's a battle is when we're in duality consciousness. But in unity consciousness, that is simply, it's not separate, it's just the relationship of polarity. So the light and the dark is, and we can experience life in alignment or misalignment, but misalignment is only there to indicate where we have to make an adjustment.
Yeah.
So our lower nature, so to speak, in your words, is the notion of where am I not living in truth that gets brought to light for me to face something, feel something, process something.
And it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's actually a positive.
It's not negative at all.
Because it's a process of discovery,
Exactly. Yeah. When I teach, I don't even teach in positive or negative. I dispel those concepts, and I only teach in alignment and misalignment, healthy and unhealthy, so that we understand properly relating to creation and improperly relating to it. And then how we weave that. And that's kind of how I use the language in the practice.
Yeah, reframing language and our approach to concepts is such a powerful thing.
It is.
I mean, you did today with me. You helped me with something because we were talking earlier, and I said, I think I said suffering is a part of life.
Yeah. And
that's actually not what I meant, but that's what it came out, because it's kind of like the easy, low-hanging fruit of consciousness. Yeah. But then you're like, suffering actually is a choice, which I do know that in my body,
100%.
And discomfort is a part of life, but suffering is not, 100%. You can choose. And I referenced after you helped me, reframe that, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which is such an incredible book.
100%.
And also I think of James Allen, As a Man Thinketh, and these books, and how these men tapped into, Viktor Frankl is in a concentration camp and just made a decision, I'm not going to suffer.
Exactly.
Now, from all exterior viewing of his situation, he's starving, he's being beaten, he's in prison, he's potentially being, marched to the death chamber, but you make a choice, and it's really powerful. And I think human beings can be afraid of accessing that dimension in accessing that perception of reality, because when you access that, you're also accountable, in a different way, because people like to be victims,
100%.
And I think now too, in modern culture in America, because that's all what I can speak to, I'm in America, there is a glorification of victimized thinking and being 100%. A victim and, oh, poor me and this and happened. And I'm not taking away anything that people have gone through, trauma and experiences and all that. But all of those things aren't negative. They can be a learning lesson, They could be an experience that felt negative, but that doesn't mean it was negative, because sometimes, and I read a book about a child soldier from Africa. And this young man, was he was drugged and then forced to machine gun and kill his own parents, hack his sister apart with a machete. Now, that can damage you for life, if you, in your mindset. But this man had the biggest smile and the biggest light rating from him because he made a choice, and so when I get a little upset too when people are talking about, victims in America, like they've suffered because whatever. I'm like, well, there's, it's also context, and it's also for me, when I feel like I'm going through something hard or I'm not getting my way or I'm suffering, all I have to do is think about him or other people who've gone through much harder things and could use that as an excuse their whole life. And most people, 95% of people, would pity them and allow that, But he took that tremendously difficult situation and transformed it into, I'm going to live my life in love. I'm going to live my life and I'm going to view what happened. And his language wasn't, I suffered so much and went through this. And so it's a good reminder, and like for even me, I can know these things intellectually and get it and appreciate it and then slip back into, whatever, the human experience or the mindset. And I want to touch a little bit too on, relativity and absolutes and truth, because it's such an interesting concept of, where it seems like it can be a slippery slope. For me personally, I have my ideals and I definitely believe in right and wrong. And some people say there is no right and wrong, it just is. And, I can understand that approach, but there are certain, morality and things like, a woman gets raped, these things, pedophilia, they just seem kind of universal standards that, I would like to use the word totally wrong. Now you can have someone has a lot of language around truth and relativity and, it's not wrong, it happened. There's, and of course good can come from these things and transformation can come from these things. But when you start kind of diving into this different dimension of consciousness and these things we're talking about, how do you embody in your life, drawing lines in the sand, so to speak, or maybe you don't, but raising your son and living your truths, how do you define, these boundaries, if you will, of, things that can happen that are, just tragic like that,
Yeah, the foundation in the practice, like when we talk about truth, because and I do teach this. There's not positive or negative, good, bad, right, wrong. Those are all value judgments. There is, though, proper adherence to creation, and that's why I teach an alignment misalignment. So someone being raped is a misalignment, and there's different degrees of misalignments, right? You can have a misalignment of not staying true to your word, and then you can have a misalignment of thinking harming someone is the way to go. Right. And so when we talk about, there is absolute truth, there is no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's how I honestly feel right now, how you honestly feel right now. There's what you're currently doing. There's what may be important to you, but the truth doesn't change. But life itself is relative to the nature of our experiences, right? So based on your journey of life, what could be pain points for you is relative to the nature of your journey. That could be different than the young man from Africa, right? Different degrees of intensity, different experiences, but everyone's experience is valid unto themselves. In understanding the relationship of life, when people get lost in the spiritual abstractness, it lends itself to too many distortions without proper checks and balances. And there is checks and balances to life. That's how energy works. Right. So if I play out misalignments, I will create experiences in those alignments that are designed to check me. And there has to be responsibility and accountability for how we move, because it's this, what we are is this creative power, and it's the first responsibility in existence, how we wield it. And so our treatment of others and how we move and the care for ourselves and others, these are not negotiations. They're staples to creation, because we're all a part of the creation itself. And so in the practice, we break it down where, like I said, I don't get caught up in the value judgment space. It's just a pure recognition of something being properly relating or improper relating. So for instance, how we break this down, there's key sets of values and principles. And what they hold. So for instance, if I'm living in truth, then that means I'm also operating synergistically. If I'm operating synergistically, it means I move with proper consideration to the all. That means I don't move in ways that are just self-serving at the cost of or exploitation of everyone else. And I don't move at the cost of myself in appeasing everything else. If I'm going to live wholly in the fullness of me, that means I take care of myself to properly show up and contribute. So that means it's not all about me, but it's also not discard me and it's only about everybody else. Yeah. And so what's important to understand how absolute truth functions, it's the notion of those key aspects. So again, what is changeless, uncompromising, universal, all-inclusive. And then there's either us properly relating to it or improperly relating to it. And so if I got to the point in me that I feel like harming someone is the best decision I can make, something is off in me, period. Yeah. I don't call it wrong. I don't call it negative because I'm not interested in that. It's just the recognition that I'm improperly relating to creation and I have to address it. Yeah. And if I can see it that way, then instead of getting caught up in the value judgment and therefore create the narrative of good and bad people and not what's happening in me that led to me doing that. Yeah. And that's the information we want. It helps me understand how to move. And because experience is a service, no matter the intensity, no matter the traumatic nature of the event, all experience is a service. And sometimes we're present enough to understand the service to then grow from it and utilize it. Sometimes we don't catch it and we end up burying ourselves in the pain of traumatic experiences. All of the options are on the table. But the beautiful thing about creation is everything still flows to truth eventually. And so the journey of life, for us to function properly, there is structure to it. Yeah. There are adherences to it. And just because there's no right or wrong, good or bad, does not mean that people can do whatever they want and not think there's consequences, because there is. Because that's how creation works. It's all energetics, but it's not. But there's not a judgment to it in the mind of source consciousness, because it recognizes the nature of everything's purposeful function. We get caught up in the value judgment and the narratives, and then inadvertently perpetuate things. Because if I judge my emotions as positive or negative or good or bad, then that means if I judge it as bad, then I won't want to feel it. If I don't want to feel it, I stifle my own system, and then the very things I want to not feel, I end up playing out. Yeah. Right. And so the way I break it down in Creatorhood is to understand the systems that work with these concepts so that we're more focused on it. So instead of even labeling a generalized term like that, it's not, I feel bad about this thing. It's, I specifically feel guilt, or I specifically feel sadness, or I specifically feel anger, because we want the precision of what is actually on for me, because then I know what to address. Yeah. But if I stay generalized, I don't know what to address. And then it just perpetuates more. And so and part of the journey of understanding the difference between victimhood and creatorhood is, if I have an experience, like say I have an experience where I'm physically abused, right? If that is the experience, I could use that as an excuse and say, well, I've been physically abused, so I have these issues now and I don't do da 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 da. But if that's my awareness, then I have the opportunity to meet whatever I have to meet in me to live beyond that experience, which is the point
of the experience,
right? But we don't always catch it. Yeah. Right? And that's where people will reinforce the victim narrative. And you're correct. We've created victim culture, right? I'm offended by everything. Yep. Or the famous phrase that is so untrue, but people say all the time, you make me feel. Oh. Not true, right?
Yeah. You just gave your power away.
Yeah, we choose how we feel. Yeah. We choose the emotion, whether we're constantly aware of it or not. Yeah. And so we've created these little unassuming things that reflect victim culture. But we have to be able to honor the experience. So if someone is raped, and that's their experience, it's a valid experience. And you have to be able to help them work through the emotions involved and the energetics for them to reclaim the creatorhood aspect, to be able to grow beyond it. Yeah. But if we don't acknowledge the pain points, then we're not actually meeting it from the proper place. And so if someone just went through a really intense experience, or I was physically harmed, or I'm in the middle, like walking the street, and someone runs up and starts punching me in the face. If someone's punching me in my face in real time, that's not the moment to go, how am I creating this for myself, right? That's the moment for me to handle my business and take care of myself, and ideally in the best consideration possible in relation to the other person. Yeah. Because I still don't want to get caught up in this person being an enemy, but I don't want to sit there and just get beat on. And if someone is feeling the pain of like going through the process of being raped, and they have emotions to work through around that, and fears to work through, and anger and guilt, that's part of the process they have to work through to remember their creatorhood. Yeah. And so there's a lot of factors involved, but when we understand truth, to know that there is no right, wrong, good or bad, but there is proper adherence to the systems at work. And And there's no healthy functioning that will be shown through the harm or exploitation of another. And there's no healthy functioning that comes from people pleasing or me doing things at the compromise of my integrity.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why when we do things like that, we end up developing things that reflect the distortion or the misalignment.
Yeah.
And so that's how I break it down in Creatorhood for the proper adherences that then structurally meet that, but don't lose sight of the truth of what's all that work, even in those traumatic, intense, painful experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting, just the human beings and perception, and
Yeah.
like I could even disagree with some of what you're saying,
For sure.
but I know that at the end of the day, you actually feel the same way that I probably feel, but you just phrase it differently. Or,
100%.
For example, say you and I, go to dinner after this and we get in a bar fight, and now we don't get in a bar fight, but some guy comes and starts beating on me. I know that you know he's misaligned, as you would say.
100%.
And you would step in and do what you thought was aligned.
100%.
Now, I may use the language, he's wrong and you're going to, fix it, but it's not about that. It's, and so.
Exactly.
But we human beings need people for some reason to believe or, think and say the things that they feel exactly like they feel them. But it's like, I already know that you're going to do what's aligned. So it doesn't have to be the exact language, know? And so it's spiritual maturity, and it's knowing yourself and confidence too, that people lack, I think, at times and that's why there's division, and religion is obviously a great example of, people wanting other people to fit into this box and this way that we believe things. But I already know, for example, if I were to say, I already know that you're a man who knows what's right and what's wrong. Now it's a different language, but I have a trust in you. I understand the concept. And so I don't have to have you think the way I think, use the exact same words, and I'm open to reframing how I even think about it, because I think misalignment and alignment is a very appropriate way to think about those things. It's interesting to think about, what is it though that, if I wasn't like this, what is it in me that needs you to be, to think like I think? And I think it's insecurity, lack of personality development, and just other, not being aligned. And if many people had these conversations immediately, and we found these, commonalities between each other instead of the divisions, the world would be a better place pretty quick. It's pretty amazing. Like, just reframing, it's powerful, that people don't think about it. And transitioning into a different topic, but the same thing, like masculinity, femininity, and embodying these things, and the term toxic masculinity, we're talking about language here and reframing things. And I personally despise that, because to me, it's not toxic masculinity, it's a lack of masculinity. Masculinity is not toxic. There's nothing toxic about it. Just like there's nothing toxic about femininity. It's alignment, misalignment.
Exactly.
And, to say, it's kind of like saying, I don't know, just like it's a terrible sunset. No, it's a sunset. Some sunsets are more colorful and beautiful and blows your mind, and some are but it's still a sunset. And so masculinity is masculinity, but it's actually a lack of toxic masculinity. I think what people really feel when they say that, and they're trying to talk about that, is the misalignment of masculinity, but it's actually more the lack of masculinity, in my opinion. And because masculinity is a beautiful thing, and so and so is femininity. And you do men's work and I do men's work, and we're in the field of trying to help, men in whatever way we can. And, it's been on my mind a lot, and I don't have all the answers, but I do have a passion of like helping men come into that embodied masculinity. And I think it's interesting that we even have to do that. And it really indicates how our culture is so sick, like 500 years ago. I don't think that, the tribe, some guy was wondering about what it was to be a man, or the woman was wondering about what it was to be a woman. They just embodied it. But because of the complexities of culture and the confusions and these things that are introduced in society, now we have to like come back to like our primal essence. We have to spend all this time and energy trying to figure it out. But isn't it absurd that we have to figure it out? Like, I'm a man, like, why do I have to figure it out? And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, like how culture and modernism in some ways, and what they think is actually progress and progressiveness, has actually, blurred these lines and has abandoned just common sense, like common sense theology. And that we had to spend time debating things that are just, not really things that you would ever debate, and just the it's not even evolution, you know, from 500 years ago. It's dissension, in my opinion. In some ways, it's more misalignment, you know. And it seems like humanity has gotten more and more misaligned when we should be getting more aligned with the resources that we have, the knowledge that we have, the technology that we have, the discoveries, the science, the advance, you know. We should be becoming more aligned, but we're getting further and further away, sometimes it seems, from the essentials of reality, you know, that, you know.
Yeah, in some spaces, like it's,
Yeah.
because it wouldn't be uniform, because there is a lot of progress we're making in certain areas as it comes to awareness and understanding and more.
Yeah, I don't mean like a broad
insights.
scope, just in certain subjects, you know.
Because, you know, in Creatorhood, I break down the relationship of masculine and feminine principle, right? It's and I always break it down from the energetics of life first.
Yeah.
And that way, because going back to truth, like why I call this practice the art of living from truth is it tunes into what is the universal thing, and then how does it apply to all the differences that we experience.
Yeah.
And so when I break it down that way and understand the difference between aligned masculine and feminine and misaligned masculine and feminine, aligned masculine and feminine is just the proper way that the principle functions in energetics.
Yeah.
Misaligned is the distorted form of that when we're not functioning properly. So like if I don't know how to process my emotions in my feminine, then I'm going to, and then I'm misaligned in my feminine, because we have both and they're not separate. If one of them is misaligned, they both are.
Yeah.
Right. So if I don't process emotions properly inside myself, then I'm going to use my masculine to protect myself from feeling, and then that's going to lead to other behaviors. And what would normally be aggression turns into violence. What would normally be assertiveness turns into like oppression. What would normally be suggestiveness in my feminine would be provocation. What would normally be, it's like they switch into something, and for me in the practice, I'm really specific about word choice and definition. And I have definitions for every word I use, because I think one of the things we could do better as a species is just be more precise when we talk, right? Because we can get a little messy. And so part of that is so that people have a clear lens on what I'm saying and what it means, because then that helps us meet in the concepts, right? So if someone has different word choices, and when I have conversations with people in different religions, we're always weaving in conversation. And most of the time when people disagree with me, it's usually because they're caught up in words. When we talk long enough, I'm always exploring, where does the truth live, right, in our conversation, so that we understand, okay, so if you use these words, these are the words I use for that. And so the concept's conveying what? And then we get there and we're like, okay, so this is where we sync.
Yeah.
And where the truth lives in every spiritual practice and religion is where they all universally sync.
Yeah.
And so when we think of then the masculine and feminine principle, all of creation functions in this relationship. So I used to, when I first started teaching, I presented it as a way of like masculine energy and feminine energy, but I realized that wasn't an accurate expression of it, because it still conveys it as if it's separate.
Yeah.
But they both are actually the relational dance of what's inside of energy that allows energy to vibrate and be a thing.
Yeah.
And so then if you go fractal enough, then everything is exploring life through that relationship until you get to a form of a male and female and interactivity. And so even if someone is in like a same-sex relationship, someone is still going to be in the masculine pole, someone's going to be in the feminine pole. And even if you're in a heterosexual relationship, someone's going to be in the masculine pole, someone's going to be in the feminine pole. And there's times in life where those will switch for specific things, because it's that intrinsic, right? So like receptivity is our feminine, the giving is our masculine, right? Steadiness is masculine, discipline is masculine, playfulness is feminine, fluidity is feminine. And where people talk about feminine flow is actually both, right? Because in order to be in flow, you have to have steadiness and the fluidity. And so the relationship of it is, it doesn't function as 0 or 100, and it doesn't function as 50-50. It's what I call the optimal ratio. So how much of my masculine to how much of my feminine is me living my authentic embodiment?
Yeah.
And then how does that show up in the relational containers? And so then where certain dynamics in life, everyone is naturally led with one or the other.
Yeah.
And then if we don't have a judgment about one or the other, we then know how to operate in the dance of ourselves freely.
Yeah.
When we lack awareness of what's going on and we start to just interpret or make up shit of what we think it is, and it's not properly tuned, that's where culture can end up developing hindrances in a society.
Yeah.
Because people build culture from whatever awareness they're in. You know what I mean? And so if it can be an expansive culture that understands more truth-based function in life, or it can be a culture that has built its entire existence on distortion and shitty human behavior. Yeah. Right. So the journey of it in understanding, I agree with you. The concept of toxic masculinity or toxic femininity is just a judgment. Because what people usually think of what toxicity is, it's really just a loud distortion. And when I hear that concept, I tell people, all the while during any relational dynamic or experience you had, there were little hints and whispers to make different decisions.
Yeah.
And we don't make those different decisions. It just gets louder and louder and louder. And the loud distortion is what people usually call toxic, but the judgment of it prevents you from actually understanding what's really happening. Mm-hmm. And so if we were to understand the aligned version of functioning in our masculine and feminine and the misaligned version, it like if I were to break it all down, it's so wild when I teach it because it's so evident. Like people see it and they're like, oh shit, I play that out all the time. That's why I'm in my misalignment. Oh, this is the aligned version of that. The issue in our society is they make blanket statements. So they'll say toxic masculinity for things that are actually healthy masculine function, right? Like someone would say aggression, but aggression is a healthy thing. It has to be exercised. It's something that everyone has, men and women alike, because everyone has masculine and feminine in them, and we have to be able to exercise it. But suppressed aggression turns into violent, unhealthy behavior, right? So assertiveness is an important aspect. The ability to say no when you mean no, the ability to say yes when you mean yes, the ability to say, I'm doing this thing and I'm going with it and I'm being committed. That is such an important thing. But sometimes people take assertiveness as being like, oh, you're being so harsh and mean, and it's not. Right. So there's healthy function that gets but that's a lack of awareness. And so that's part of the thing in our journey is how do we, and so for me, teaching where I teach is because if I was tapping into these things and the more I explored them, the more they kept proving themselves, then I'd have to be an asshole to not share it. And in my eyes, the notion of understanding the truth of something is that it's always consistent, that it will apply no matter what. And that's what's been so powerful about this work is I don't have to force it on anybody. When I have conversations with people, there's people that go, well, I disagree with that. I go, cool. If you're willing to explore it, because it always ends up proving itself. It's what it did for me personally. And then being able to form and put language around it was just me doing my best to craft it in a way that can take these multidimensional concepts and apply it in a practical way. And so when we think about living in, it's really powerful because I get brought in all kinds of spaces, right? To drop insights and talk. And we had an experience in our Sacred Sons event where this gentleman asked a question about like queer and transgender spaces. And so then I shared key fundamentals about the masculine and feminine dynamics within us and then how that shows up in the nature of our experience. And the response I got after from everyone, from heterosexual and gay, homosexual and lesbian and people considered queer, it was so powerful because it helped give people a clear lens of themselves about the understanding of what's at work inside of us to make more sense of their dynamics in reality. And I actually just did an interview with a brother of mine who's transgender male that I supported him in understanding his own physicality and inner workings and understand his own masculine and feminine principle to foster a greater integrity space in himself. Because there's an interesting journey to life, but there's no escaping the relational dynamic of masculine and feminine. It is literally at the center point of everything. So even the concept of non-binary is not a real thing because there's no way for you there's no exemption from the experience of our own masculine and feminine principle. And then when it comes to being embodied, so both of us, recognizing ourselves as men, because men and women is the reference point. They're the physical traits and qualities of the masculine and feminine principle at work. And so then there's a reason why that's the setup. And then understanding the principle at work is how we maneuver in all forms of relational dynamics, but it's a consistent point. But there's just not a lot of proper awareness around it or insight around it. And that's where people get like messed up. Because when I teach the practice, I break down masculine and feminine from the principle of energy first. And when I do that, it's funny when people hear it through the lens of man, woman. So I remember one of the times I taught and I said, these are the traits of the masculine principle. These are traits of the feminine. And then a woman goes, but I have those traits too in the masculine. And I go, yes. You do. Because you have the masculine and feminine in you. That's what I'm talking about. But she heard man, woman. And that is part of the distortion of understanding these inner workings. But for us to understand the relationship of men and women, we have to understand the relationship of the masculine and feminine principle of energy. So we have a greater understanding of us and can relate to each other stronger. So I can relate better to women through understanding my own ability to process my emotions. But if I don't process my emotions well, because I trained myself to think vulnerability and feeling emotions was an unhealthy thing, or it made me a punk, then when I see it, I'm like, nah, that's that crazy shit. But if I am more in tune to it, now I know how to hold space greater. Because then my assertiveness and command of my masculine is on, and my receptivity and attunement and intuitiveness of my feminine is on, but in the proper ratio, right? And these are like some of the fundamental keys that without these insights or proper knowledge can lend itself to a host of wild distortions that play out in our society, which is some of the stuff we've witnessed. you know?
No, that's really good. My spiritual teachers, they talk about circuitry, father circuitry, mother circuitry, and son circuitry. And, it's a slightly different approach to femininity and masculinity, because men have feminine nature too, and just like you said. And it's the balance of these circuitries, And so naturally a male, should embody more of the father-son circuitry. That doesn't mean he has mother circuitry within him, and balancing these out, balancing the masculine, the feminine within us. And I think bringing in the son circuitry is a unique approach, because sometimes we think it is just masculine and feminine, but when you bring in the concept of father, son, and mother, the Trinity, the son circuitry is different than father circuitry. It's kind of the in-between, and we have this, we can embody the Trinity spirit, so to speak, in some ways within us, and reflect the circuitries and come into more balance, and then also we can accept that some people are embodied differently. Like, some people are going to be, some men are just more naturally father circuited. Doesn't mean they don't have the mother circuitry, but they just embody the father circuitry more. Some men, and for the sake of language and the lack of language and defining things, and, that's what I really appreciate about you. You're so articulate, and you're very aware of your language. But, what people would say is, for a man who isn't in his father circuitry, is that he's soft, or he's, more. And I don't like when they say he's gentle, because then that makes it sound like a man who's father circuited isn't gentle, and it's like, that's not true.
Correct.
But yeah, he's soft, or he's, no, he's actually just in a different circuitry, and I have my opinions about how we should be as men, and what it means to, embody masculinity, and how it can serve the women in our lives, the children in our lives, and the people around us, in a higher way, and being in alignment, in that as a man, and the responsibility to show the fruits and the examples and the attributes of what masculinity is. But then we can argue about what is masculinity. And, you're an actor, and I think about, like, and you're a writer as well. If you're writing a script and you're writing a character, and, we're saying, okay, this guy's going to be a masculine, manly man. What is it that how are you defining that character? What are you writing in there? What are those attributes that are collectively recognized by humanity? And also casting, so if they're casting this man, even though you're an actor, even though someone could be an actor, a man could be an actor, he may not be able to play the part because he just doesn't embody that masculinity, and you see it, and you see typecasting, and you see certain roles, and you see, certain actors are good at playing certain roles, and because they just already have it,
Exactly.
It's just in them.
100%.
And so, if you're casting a character who is, if you will, very cheap way of saying it, an ultra masculine man, and showing these, culturally recognized characteristics, whether people agree or not, of what it is to be, the man, they're going to look for the actor who already has it in him, because you can't fake it. You can't fake 100%. It, And so I think it's an interesting thing to approach life like that. When you just view people, they either have it or they don't, or it's not fully aligned yet. And, but it's not a judgment, and it's okay. You just recognize, like, their circuitry is a little different than mine,
Yeah, and it could be a different thing or an underdeveloped thing, because that's the other part of it. Like, when you bring in the sun, kind of as you spoke to, part of the practice, we have the whole thing on relational dynamics, and so the way that masculine and feminine is played out in mature function and developing function. Yeah. And so the son and daughter represent the developing function in generations to grow into, and that's different than the line to misaligned. And so there's different stages of development with it. That part of our journey is that, and part of the journey also helps us recognize where someone is naturally led with one or the other, or condition themselves in it. Yeah. And that's where you see women who are naturally feminine led, but because of maybe pain points they experience in their feminine, create a judgment around their feminine, and then went into masculine mode to protect themselves. Yeah. Right. And so then part of when I work with women in that space, it's getting them to be able to soften more into their feminine, and that way more, and instead of balance, I usually word the harmony, because it's always in movement. Yeah. Of how to harmonize the proper ratio again. Yeah. And so when you think of the idea of someone says, I would like this to be a really prominently masculine figure, then I break down, like, so someone who is like these proper qualities and traits that are easy to witness or recognize in them is what they're looking for. And so when we think about really understanding manhood or masculine aspects, feminine aspects, womanhood, and these as a reference point, it helps us understand the nature of what those qualities, traits, and reproduction function look like, operate like, and interact like. And so then, but in the part of the distortion of our species before is if there was a judgment to one or the other, it created a hyper version of the other.
Yeah.
So like if I condition myself as a man to say that it's not okay to be vulnerable as a man, it makes me weak, then I've stifled my own feminine aspects, which will create a hyper overused function of my masculine, which will lead to a host of issues.
Yeah.
Right. And so to be more healthily and more harmoniously embodied, then it would mean that I have my feminine on proper in relation to my masculine. And then going like you stated, gentleness is an aspect of our feminine, and there's always a place for it. So like if I have a son, and being a father, there's spaces of part of me as a father is helping my son understand the line and responsibilities and discipline and commitment. And then it's knowing that it's okay to just be and rest and process things. And even one time when he was younger and he wanted to do a workout with me, he hit his edge and you could feel frustration. He started crying, and I was like, "What's coming up for you?" Right? And he said, "I just feel frustrated," and a couple of things he described. And I said, "Okay, feel that. Yeah. And then let's get back to it."
Yeah.
Right. So that's twofold. It's feel what you feel. You don't shut that out.
Yeah.
But then don't let it prevent you from going forward either.
Yeah.
And so that relationship of understanding the ability that's okay to let yourself feel and have that emotion on, and then know how to put it to use. Yeah. Don't drown it out. Don't suppress it. Yeah. And don't bury yourself in it.
Yeah.
Right. And so our ability to, and to be able to like hug my son and kiss him and let him know I love him. And then at another moment, like you say, we got to dial in, and all of these things are a part of the comprehensive experience. Yeah. And when we think life isn't comprehensive, that's another distortion we end up creating. Yeah. Because that's another universal truth in life is designed to be comprehensive. Yeah. Right. We're designed to move and rest. We're designed to talk and listen. Yep. We're designed to experience life through body, mind, spirit connection. We're designed to experience life through the ratio of our masculine and feminine. Yeah. There's no escaping it. And those are some of those universal keys that if we understood enough and put down the value judgments of them, we would be weaving far more harmoniously in our lives as individuals and community and society. Yeah. But then, and to me, that's part of the journey we're on, because the more I watch people come to my events and practices, how quickly they get it, how quickly they start to implement it more, I've watched advance forward. Mm-hmm. And that's been so powerful, because it's showing me that it's actually dialing in more, and more people are actually feeling the truth of it. And one of the most common phrases I could be hearing now is, "Man, you put words to something I've literally been feeling and not knowing how to express or move with." Mm-hmm. And so we're watching that dial in, and then at the same time, we're watching other people hit thresholds or there become more distortion or confusion around it. And so the opportunity is, if we're growing more and we have the opportunity to live more embodied as an example, it helps support greater leadership and guidance to what's possible. Yeah. And in the information age where people are putting out so much information on the internet, whether it's accurate or not, we have to be able to know how to sift through that and how to help clean it up. And if we're operating with something that we know how to identify as universal or always consistent, it helps us have better reference points to maneuver with all the information. Yeah. And in my opinion, that's been one of the biggest struggles is early on, and in a lot of spaces in society now, we've had a lot of shitty reference points. Yeah. And we've based a lot of reference points on things external that are always changing. Yeah. But if we have reference points that are more anchored in consistency, it helps us make sense of the journey, both in whether we're aligned or misaligned, or in what's more developed in us and underdeveloped in us. And that's part of, again, it's like the first class I introduced in the beginning, I introduced the practice, is how to get our reference point back to truth. Yeah. And so it's a really interesting weaving of the game, but it's a powerful thing to grow and evolve in that awareness, and then actually experience the embodiment or the experiential essence of it. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up that experience with your son, when he started crying, and because, I think the generation, before us, and then the boomers got told a lot by their fathers, don't cry, 100%. Don't cry. And what a disservice,
Huge.
And even raising my sons, there's a tendency in me, at times to say that when they start crying about something over triple. And of course, they're like, 4 and 6 years old. So, but I don't ever want to say that, like don't cry, because then it's teaching them that expressing emotions and feeling is wrong.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, if we look at culturally, a massive problem with men over the generations is that they were taught, and not purposely by their fathers,
just what they
knew from their fathers and their fathers. And you got these soldiers coming out of World War II, and a different type of man, and then they, are raising their sons, don't cry, it's weak, don't do this, don't express. And they didn't mean to, but it was a great disservice.
Yeah, and it hindered our growth in certain ways.
Yeah, and telling my sons, I try and talk to my son, especially my 6-year-old, because he's a little older than 4 and can understand, there are things in life that are really valuable and worth crying about. And there are some things, you don't need to get quite so emotional about. And it's okay to feel, but, you do have to not, give in so much. But it's okay, feel it, but let's get through it, like you said.
Exactly.
And I think that men like you and us and others who are doing this, the next generation is going to be so much more empowered, with men and learning to be, vulnerable and express their emotions. And I love the dance of being a man and the multidimensionality. I think we have to be multidimensional. And I wrote a poem once, about these hands, these hands, like they can hold a baby, which is so feminine, and caress and touch a woman and plant a flower. Yet if I needed to, I'll rip your eyeballs out with these same hands to protect my family. I'll go chop wood and, gut a deer and do whatever I need. And that's like, it's recognizing the different dimensions of us, and just encompassing it. And it's like, wow, these hands can create, they can destroy, they can caress, and what a gift, what a beautiful thing. And I don't have to, some men think they can't caress and be gentle, and that these hands are made for just this and this and this. Again, going back to maybe how they were raised, or these different false concepts of unaligned masculinity, and just helping men understand it's okay to tap into that, and creativity is often, in my opinion, a feminine thing. Like when I'm trying to get creative in something, or make music, or write my poetry and write, I'm tapping into to my femininity in some way, not that it's not masculine, but I find that when I tap into that sensitive feminine side, I can tap more into, that creative aspect at times. Again, not that masculinity isn't creative, not at all. It's just a different expression in a different way.
Yeah, I break that down as the relationship of masculine and feminine. So there's certain things that are both, and creativity is both, but feminine is the creative cultivation. So it's like you're tapping into the sensations, receiving the access, and the creative expression is the masculine, because masculine represents the structural form of it outward. Yeah. And so it's the relationship of both, the way I break it down.
And another interesting that I, for me personally, I'm not saying this is for everybody, but, my wife and my mother and women in my life may laugh when they hear me say this, because it may not be evident to them, but in many ways, I've learned more about being a man from women than I have from men. And that's an interesting concept, because, for me, a good woman and a strong woman is going to teach you how to be a man in many ways. It's not like they're thinking about it and doing that, or thinking, I'm going to teach them how to be a man, and so I bring that up because it's very easy to think, a boy needs to learn how to be a man from a man, which he does in many ways. But the value of what we can learn from women, and when a woman who's embodied in her femininity and is a powerful woman and a strong woman, they can teach you so much about, not even, like I said, they're not thinking they're teaching you about, I'm going to teach this man how to be a man. It's just that they force you to be masculine, in some ways, it's hard to articulate for me, but I just know that from my, I have 2 beautiful mothers, I have sisters, and, an incredible wife, and before my wife, partners. And when I look back in retrospect, all of those women helped me become a better embodied man. Yeah. And I think men would do well in their lives to think about, how can a woman help them, tap into that? Because in some ways, sometimes women, because they're looking for an embodied man, masculine man, they can help you become that if the men around you aren't embodied. You know what I'm saying? So if you're blessed to have a good father and a good uncle figure and a good teacher and a coach and mentors who are embodied, that's great. But if you don't have that, in some ways, women can serve to show the contrast, if you will,
Yeah. Yeah, it's the way I break it down is part of what we can understand about what it means to be a man is in relation to women and what they invite for the masculine. Because part of the issue is like there's certain things women will do that if a man is not aware enough to recognize what's happening, he'll actually retreat instead of step forward.
Yeah.
But what causes him to do that is actually a lack of understanding of proper masculine reflection.
Yeah.
And so there are certain things that no woman will be able to fill that is an important role for us to understand as men through men.
Yeah.
That's why, like, when I hear that concept, if like a woman is a single mother and they'll say like, I'm the mother and father, and so you're not.
No,
there's
never.
no such thing.
Never can.
You will not replace the importance of a masculine figure. However, what you're describing is also accurate, which is if you understand how to recognize what is being asked of you in relation to women, it does help cultivate masculine aspects. But for that to work, it means there's parts of you already attuned to exploring what it means to be a man in relation to women based on what they're showing or reflecting or revealing.
Yeah.
And it's an important thing because when we can understand certain things about the feminine, it helps us note what it's asking of the masculine in its space. And also, and just like you said, whether they know they're doing it or not. So just by them being in their feminine and what that reflects, if any part of us is on a masculine, it calls it forward.
Yeah.
And invites it forward, which is part of the feminine's job.
Yeah.
Like even in the relation to the principle. And so I understand what you're conveying in the expression of it in that way, and then understanding the other key components for the development, and vice versa, right? It's the same thing where certain things that men being embodied, it helps the feminine understand itself in relation to the masculine.
Yeah.
And then there's certain things that only feminine can reflect. And that's part of the relationship of why community is so important.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. So what's, looking back on your life, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do?
What would I consider to be the hardest? It's a great question. I think at different points, there was different things. Like there was one point where it felt like the hardest thing for me to do was be vulnerable. And then I worked through that.
Yeah.
At one point, it seemed like the hardest thing for me to do was sit with my shame. And then I worked through that.
Yeah.
At one point, it felt like the hardest thing for me to do was confront shit that I thought was not okay. And then got through that. And I think one of the edges for me now has been like, as I expand and mature in leadership, what it means to really live into the next iteration of where responsibilities grow and margin for error shrinks. Because there's more, it's a different standard of operating.
Yep.
And living in that on a consistent basis outright has been one of the most amazing invitations and calls in my life, and for sure one of the most confronting.
Yeah.
Because it demands really important aspects of me that I don't get to excuse myself out of.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the way I would answer that when I think about the journey of my life, because I love like putting in work. I love, not difficult for me, but loving the edge, being uncomfortable and those things. But those different stages of like getting through vulnerability, dealing with shame, speaking up for myself, because I used to have that little stint of being a people pleaser where it felt like confronting was like,
yeah.
And but then really growing in leadership and recognizing what was asked of me to do so. And that's what and then this next iteration I'm being asked to step into. Yeah, it would be more in stages than saying like one hardest thing. It would be different stages of what I found to be the most difficult at a given space and time.
Yeah, no, that was very good. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. That was
good. Yeah. And then wrapping up here, just curious. So if your son came to you and gave you a compliment on being a father, what would be something amazing for you and to hear? What would you want to hear him to say? Like where you're like, wow, I'm doing my job good. And I don't. You know, it's an interesting question because I'm not trying to like. It's not an egotistical thing. It's you know, it's a successful like. I've done a good job. You know, like I've if he came to you and was like, you know what, Dad, and then just said something to you that would like make you feel like, wow, that's beautiful, and like I'm doing something right. What would it be?
I think he's done it. He's done it in different stages.
Yeah, I'm sure he has. Yeah.
He, yeah, what would it be? I'm thinking like he when he was 4 years old, he put a recurring note in my phone that I left there to this day. He's 14 now. So for 10 years, I get a reminder every day from something he left me at 4 years old. And he said, you're the best dad in the world. And Joe, you're also pretty savage. And he said, and you're going to be really good at your job, is what he said.
Yeah.
And as he got older and sees what I do, he every so often would say like, he expressed to me, Dad, it's really awesome what you do and how you support people.
Yeah.
And you do a really great job, and thank you for being a father. And it's like, those moments.
Yeah.
And he shared those things. And I think, now that he's a teenager, I'm watching him really want to assert his sovereignty, and yet really still loves his connection to me. So he always wants to let me know when he's doing his, I'm doing it, but not because you said so, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, right, I'm making the decision, even though there's times I've had to tell him. But I think through what would be the next thing for that for me is if he, you were really there and like fully committed or dedicated to me.
Yeah.
And in a way that, but you didn't like compromise yourself or sacrifice yourself in what your mission is. It would probably be something in that vein.
Yeah.
Because I love being a father, and I've been so engaged with my son, right, from day one. And even with though things with his mother and I didn't work out and we're in co-parentship, it mattered to me to be there for my son.
Yeah.
And so I think any way that he would phrase that acknowledges that he really felt the truth of that would probably be the highest compliment I could ever get from him.
Yeah.
That he really felt me, my love, and my commitment to him as my son through and through.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I asked that because, as a father myself, I think oftentimes we can analyze our parenthood by, the wrong things they do, the things that are, not in alignment. Sorry. Yeah. The things that are not in alignment that we, but it's easy to forget about like all the good things they do. And I had a moment one time about a year ago, my daughter was 7 years old, and we were in Tucson, and we were in the downtown area and coming out of the grocery store, and there was a homeless man sitting and begging. And I was on the phone, and I saw him, and we walked by and we went to where we were going, which was pretty close by to this place, and got off the phone, and my daughter said, Dad, can we go get that man some food? And so she didn't say something to me like, Dad, you're such a good dad. But when she asked me that question, I felt this amazing, like, I'm doing something right. Yeah. She's got compassion. She's got awareness. And I said, absolutely. So we went and bought him some food, and, she wanted to give it to him, and she gave it to him, and 6 years old. And so I thought that was a moment where I felt like a good father, and she wasn't complimenting me, but it was showing that she saw that. And so I was like, wow. So me and her mother and the people in her life, we're doing something right, at least that she cared and saw and had that awareness, and, and so I think there's these times in all of our lives as parents where our children will do things that, just, remind us that we did something right, because how it is. You can go to bed at night thinking, "Oh man, I'm fucking this up, man. Like, am I doing anything right? Like, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, Legit. And then there's these little situations like that where it's
you're
like, we imparted something, But we need those, we need the feedback, and we
100%.
We need those moments.
Watching them do things like that, it's an indicator of something.
Yeah,
it is helpful because we don't always know, right? Like, we don't know what things may come through later. Right. Or if certain things that we share, because sometimes it doesn't seem like they're listening, and we'll share certain things, and then you'll watch them like, oh, they are listening. Oh, it did land. Oh, they are. Oh, yeah. Just by them being them. Yeah. And that's it's a beautiful feeling. Yeah. And especially in that way, when you watch their care for someone, their consideration of someone, or it's like, oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah. They actually the heart's intact. They're dialed in. Oh, it is a powerful confirmation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Last question for you, brother. If you had the power to change one thing, this is a big question, but if you had the power to change one thing in the world, in humanity, well, let's just say in America, if you could change one thing, you know, like if you snap your finger and it just changes overnight, what would that be?
It's a great question. Because I'm of the focus of, because everything is a service, it all leads to something. But if,
Yeah.
you know, and so I don't know if I would necessarily change something.
Or instigate something, you know, or create, or, you know.
I think it would be the recognition that though we're a nation, we really are, like the awareness or the foundational recognition that we really are all a part of something together. And so I think if there was something I could initiate, like even with this country, if it was that everyone that's here has an extraordinary opportunity to do something harmoniously across the board, right? And through our history, we thought it had to come at the cost of other people, and not, we could all build something really powerful together. And so I think if there was something to incite, it would have been more of a more intrinsic spark of that in everybody involved in foraging this country.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because part of my dedication now is wanting to guide us there to that point, to some degree, you know?
Yeah.
In whatever way is I'm capable of doing it, you know? But I think that would be a thing that and maybe not so much that I would wish to change, but it would be a cool thing to witness happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Consciousness shift, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great answer, because some people would, you know, maybe think of a material thing. I would take away homelessness, or, you know, I would, which is great, you know, or I would, but all problems start in the consciousness.
100%.
And so
every single one of them.
Like if I could just change everyone's consciousness overnight to a certain consciousness, wow, yeah, there we go, boom,
for real.
Yeah, that would, you know,
right?
It starts in the conscious, the thought life, and
exactly. It's just, if everyone even functioned with the understanding the flow of creation, that everything's an internal cause external effect, that alone would change our entire civilization in a day.
Yeah, some people would say, "Oh, I'd get rid of guns immediately. Every gun disappear."
Yeah.
Well, the guns aren't the problem. The consciousness.
The one. Yeah. It's what it is.
Yeah, man. I really appreciate you, brother. And, you know, we're all in this journey, just trying to change our consciousness and tap into consciousness and transform and be better human beings and figure out this walk, you know? So I've learned a lot from you, and I can tell you're very intentional, and you've spent a lot of time understanding language and, you know, and use and perception, and it's a valuable thing, and it's something I can gain from, and I have gained from you. And so thanks for sitting down, and I think the listeners really appreciate all that you had to share.
Yeah. Thank you for the light that you are, bro.
Yeah, brother.
I really appreciate
Keep shining.
Yeah, come on.
Subscribe, like, share, follow. You know the routine. Thanks for listening.